Welcome to Albert Camus Radio, and today we're going to be interviewing Dr. James Woelfel, Dr. Jim Woelfel, formerly of the University of Kansas and Professor Emeritus at the University of Kansas. Welcome to Albert Camus Radio.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Glad to be here.
All right, here we go with the questions then. When and how did you first encounter Camus' work?
You know, it's funny. I was trying to think about that. And by the time I was a junior, senior in college, I had some interest in existentialism. I took a senior philosophy course where one of our readings was Karl Jaspers. And so I got sort of interested. And then Camus' book was his novel, The Stranger, was quite popular. So I read it and I actually didn't like it. I think it just struck me at the wrong time.
Yeah.
But then, of course, I got into graduate school. I read more of Camus and I was hooked.
Yeah. It seems like The Stranger is, when I say typical, I don't mean mundane or boring. I mean typical. Most people make their entrance into Camus' world through The Stranger. And I was lucky. I discovered Camus 95 probably. So I was actually able to read The First Man as it was,
Right.
produced in English. So very rare that you could read for the first time something published of length by Camus at that time. So yeah, I got lucky in that way. I think Stranger was the first thing I read too. I still don't quite know how I feel about that text. I mean, I understand the importance.
I don't either.
Yeah.
After all these years.
Yeah.
And teaching it over and over again, I still don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah. And students want you to have a really firm opinion of it.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't.
Yeah.
Same way. Yeah, that's good to hear. What are some of your favorite lines from Camus and why?
Oh gosh. I think my favorite essay of Camus is Return to Tipasso, which was in his collection called Summer.
Yep.
He goes back after the war, returns to a beautiful place with Roman ruins where he had had so many happy times as a young man. And he experiences a sense that amidst all the turmoil and suffering of the world, one has to keep within a source of freshness and joy, he called it. And I think one of my favorite lines is, in the midst of winter, I learned that there was in me an invincible summer.
Yeah.
There are also some great lines in The Plague, which is my all-time favorite Camus novel. I think when early in the book, when Tarou asks Dr. Rieu if he believes in God, and he says, no, but what does that mean? I'm struggling in the dark, trying to make something out, but I've long ceased finding that original.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I guess I would say that I think the last page of The Plague is one of the great works of literature. And
really?
It's some of the greatest lines in literature, and it's and of course it is so timely.
It is.
I mean, that is our permanent condition as human beings.
It is. Yeah. It is.
The rats will always return.
Absolutely. Those lines just give me chills still. Thinking about. You hit on some absolute fascinating pieces. So sort of in reverse order. To write the Plague and to have those stacked levels in there of meaning,
yes,
it can become a gimmick that won't work. And one of the ways to avoid that being a gimmick is to nail the ending, which he did, because it just locks them all together for me.
Yes.
This is World War II, but yes, this is our condition.
That's right. And he's talking about pestilences or plagues in that wider sense that
Yeah.
Tarot primarily introduced us to, that it's all the things that terrorize people and cause suffering.
Yeah, that's really important. Lately that's been something that has really called my attention to Camus' work, is the power of his opening lines and the power of his closing lines.
Yeah.
I'd like to take a little tour through his
Yeah,
work.
that's yeah. I heard you do that.
Yeah, with Gordon. Yeah, that sort of came up there. And now
I think that's a very good insight. Yeah.
And now you reinforce that with this power of closing lines in the plague. So yeah. Absolutely. And the Tapasa piece, the Tapasa and then Return to Tapasa. They're wonderful pieces to read, and he's at his best when he's describing that Mediterranean, classical Roman world that he falls in love with at that point. So the work there is just outstanding with that. So really, really good stuff. All right. Do you consider Camus an African writer? Why or why not?
No, no, I really don't. That's a kind of complicated question.
It is.
He was a French colonial, a pied noir, and whose family, whose ancestry went back 2 or 3 generations in Algeria.
Yeah.
So he clearly felt himself part of Algeria. But he wrote very much like a European.
Yes.
And I think that I think part of the problem is when we hear the word Africa, we really think sub-Saharan Africa. We're not typically thinking of Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt. So that's part of the problem, I think. But certainly he considered himself a Mediterranean man. And I think that's very important. He contrasts that with being an inland French person. He certainly considers himself French, and of course, all French colonials were automatically citizens of France.
Yes.
So
it is. It's a wonderfully complicated question, because you've got the politics of France, you've got the politics of the colonial status, you've got his status as not being poor, but he's French, he's not indigenous. But how many generations back does that count? Like you said, if you're fresh or if you're multi-generational, you're born on the soil. And it contributes to this, I think, to his fence sitting as time went on with the question in Algeria, and he didn't pick a side because he couldn't.
That's right. That reminds me of another of my favorite lines when he says, and this is certainly a paraphrase, I would like to be able to love my mother and also love justice. That was right in the middle of the Algerian Revolution.
Absolutely. And then that becomes such a focal point of his position, because he doesn't say much else about the Algerian question at that time. And when you look at the early stuff, he's deeply involved with the indigenous population. The early newspaper articles about the conditions of the agricultural workers that were indigenous population in Algeria, and he makes an effort to bring. One of the reasons he splits with the Communist Party splits with him is he wants the indigenous people included in this workers movement in Algeria, and the French Communist Party says, we have to make a decision here, and we're just going to do it for the French and separate ourselves from the indigenous population. So it's tough, and it leaves I think a long mark on him that way, as being in but not. And in France, it's the same situation. A lot of times he's not really seen as French, he's seen as colonial there. Tough on him, I think.
But in an issue that arises from the plague, is that there aren't any Arabs
Yeah.
in Oran.
Yeah. Yeah. You would.
And
Yeah.
and I just have this sort of hypothesis that he is writing, and he's going to have a French publisher,
Oh,
Gallimard,
yeah. Yeah.
based in Paris,
Yeah.
and he is writing during the midst of World War II,
Mm-hmm.
when I mean, the Allies took over Oran very early in the war, but
Yep.
France was still occupied until very late.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just, my feeling is that he was looking at Oran as though it were a French city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how else to account
Yeah.
for
So
the
when
fact.
you say he's writing to a French publisher, are you getting at the point that it would please Gallimard, the French publishing house, that it was mostly French, or the German censors, that the Arab
Well,
population wasn't included?
that's a good issue. No, I just think that, of course, his main readership was going to be in metropolitan France.
Yeah. Yep.
And it was during the war, but yeah, I don't know what the censors might have made of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that again is points to the ambiguity of his situation as a French colonial.
Yes, it does.
Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah.
uh,
And I think, I guess creatively, I'm not sure where that population would have fit in to the sort of correlation you're looking for with what was going on with occupation in France. You know, it's
yeah.
not, I don't know, it's up for him to decide creatively where they'd fit in, but could have been a creative problem that just cut him out, you know. And in 1946, we don't have sort of a consciousness of including those people in the narrative, where
That's right.
a later publication, editors probably would have said, what's going on here, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Right.
let's see. Next question. Which character that Camus created do you identify with personally, and why?
Well, I'd have to say Bernard Rieu.
Yeah.
And I admire kind of courage he exhibited, and the fact that he didn't think of it as courageous.
Yeah. Yeah.
That he just thought it was common decency.
Yeah.
And so, you know, he just, in a kind of straightforward, we look to Tarot to do all the philosophizing about what's going on, but Rieu just does his job, and he does it very well, and he exhibits a great deal of compassion and this sort of thing, but he's an example of the courage of what would be an ordinary physician in a city in Algeria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is that just dedication
to
humanity. Camus moving towards that point of solidarity as being, you know, the key virtue here, and
yes.
That's what he's doing. He's exhibiting that in the finest way. So yeah, great. That's a good one. Do you think Camus' work is dated, or is it timeless, or is it a mix?
Well, I think all the literature that we call great is a mix of the time bound and the timeless. I guess I would talk about Camus in terms of timeliness.
Okay, great.
I think he is an ever timely writer, and it's interesting to me that with Camus, you've had revivals of interest in his work regularly through the decades since his death. In the 60s and 70s, early 70s, you know, it was the ideas in The Rebel, for example, and with all the protests and so forth. And then again in the 1990s, with the publication of The First Man,
Mhm.
uh, there was a new round of attention.
Yeah.
And look at the coverage the plague has
Yeah.
gotten with
Yep.
the pandemic.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think he is worn well in a way that I don't think Sartre has.
I agree. Yeah.
And I think it's that people see in him somebody really speaking about the challenges and the experiences and sufferings of ordinary people.
Yeah.
Whoa, something knocked me off here.
I still got you on my end. Are you
There
missing me?
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that he's worn very well, and it's that ethics of moderation, of limits to human action, um, and it's not flashy. It's just the way humans ought to behave.
Yeah. Yes. I love that expression of
Yeah,
timeliness.
yeah. I think
Yeah.
he is ever timely. I
Yeah.
really do.
That's
Yeah.
wonderful, because I imagine when the pandemic hit, news sources are looking for people to write some maybe extended pieces that would touch back on pieces of literature. And if you just did a Google search, the plague would come up.
Oh yeah.
But then you'd have to look at it, and you get these really high end, the Atlantic,
Oh
New
yeah.
Yorker using
New
New
York
York
Times,
Times.
New
Yep.
Yorker, yeah.
Yep.
The whole
Delving
spectrum.
into the plague again and seeing the parallels, and not just in a way that, oh, he wrote this then and it parallels with us now, but what can we learn from it?
Yes,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
What
Yeah.
can we learn from this? Because you're right, it's not flashy, it's common. Again, that's not derogatory. That's a
Well,
compliment.
that commends it. Yeah, right.
Yeah, absolutely, it does. Camus is most often included in the Club of Western Philosophy. Granting this premise, what makes one a philosopher, one writer a philosopher and another not?
Yeah. Yeah,
My wife actually came up with this question.
What?
My wife actually came up with this
Yeah.
question.
Okay. Well, it's a very good question.
Great question.
Because I think often philosophers have not taken Camus seriously as a philosopher.
Yep.
But I think they're mistaken about that.
Mhm.
I also can point to the fact that he published 2 long essays of philosophy,
Yes.
The Myth of Sisyphus and The Rebel.
Yep. Yep.
And and that is, he was not content just to write novels, short stories, and plays.
Mhm.
He wrote reflective essays which embody a lot of philosophical stuff. I mean, like existentialism and The Myth of Sisyphus, and he really did extensive research on The Rebel, and so I think he belongs there. He talked about philosophical novels in The Myth of Sisyphus.
Yes.
And I certainly would say that he wrote philosophical novels.
Yeah.
Not obtrusively so. Not and again, not in the way Sartre or say Beauvoir did.
Yeah.
But novels that were quite reflective in as they told a story. But yeah, I think he belongs there.
Yeah.
He belongs in the. I mean, he said, "I'm not an existentialist," because existentialism meant Sartre,
Yeah.
and they didn't agree.
Yeah.
So, but every anthology of existentialism includes Camus. So
Yeah.
I think he was an existentialist philosopher.
Yeah. I love that. I do that often when I've taught Camus, is to try to get some sort of maybe Aristotelian approach to it. What are necessary conditions for one to be considered a philosopher, and
Right.
get that up on the board. And then you look at Camus and get the students to try to develop a parallel list and how much it matches up, and then you drop that line on them where, well, the person himself said he's not. So, but we can say he's wrong.
Yeah,
you could argue with Camus, and he said, "I'm not an existentialist," but you are. But I understand why you said it at the time.
yeah,
So
yeah.
everything was being labeled existentialist too, because it was
That's
hitting
right. And it
helping
mainly
sell.
meant sorry.
Yes, that's what it
I mean,
sort of focused.
as existentialism was being identified with Sartreanism.
Yeah, yeah, and there's many veins of it.
Whoops.
Yeah. I think that's how you started your course too, was the distinction. We had a theistic and an atheistic line there of existentialism, and we sort of divided them up that way to begin with. So that makes a
Mhm.
huge difference. Yeah, good answer. Okay, did Camus cultivate his physical public image, his cult of personality, or was it natural and not contrived?
Uh, I don't think his I don't think of his public persona as contrived.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was pretty naturally the way he was,
Mm-hmm.
um, and uh, and I was always William Barrett some years ago wrote a book
Mm-hmm.
called Among the Intellectuals,
Yeah.
and he talked about the visits of he was talking about, of course, the New York
Yeah.
intellectuals community, and he talked about the visits of Sartre, Beauvoir, and Camus to America in the years immediately following the war. And Camus clearly comes off as the sort of easy
Yeah.
one to be with.
Yeah.
He didn't feel like he had to be talking all the time.
Yeah.
He liked to listen.
Yeah. Yeah.
and so he comes across very well there, and his I think natural modesty
Mm-hmm.
comes across in Barrett's account.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think he was pretty natural. I mean, various people didn't. Sometimes people thought he was a bit too righteous.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
too solemn about some things.
Yeah.
But no, I think he just was what he was.
I think so. Yeah, I tend to lean that way too. That's yeah. That those those three descriptions of how they acted in their natural environment is a fascinating read to see about the contrast between the big three at that time. So yeah,
And of
great.
course, a lot of women found him charming,
Yeah,
irresistible.
absolutely. Uh, more than occasionally, he allowed it to happen too. So it was, um, I mean, I kind of knew that, I think, but yeah, would have been fascinating to be able to observe the interactions and um, see his presence that way. There's some film of him, and that's always great to see, where you can get a
Mhm.
little glimpse of the person in action.
Right.
What's the biggest weakness in Camus' work and why?
Oh, that's I think I'd say, well, one thing, just a kind of general remark on his writing is that um, I cherish his emphasis on lucidity,
Mhm.
but I think that sometimes his lyricism is somewhat in competition with his lucidity. That is, that some things are not as clear as they might be because he expresses them in such lyrical form.
Okay.
Uh, Apart from that, I guess I would say that I think that his plays are less successful than his novels and short stories
Yeah.
and essays.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is ironic because he loved the theater.
Yeah.
He loved everything about the theater, and his last years, he was back in Paris directing theater.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but I would say he wrote one very good play, and that was Caligula.
Oh, really? That's your favorite?
Which I actually got to see performed in
Oh.
London
Oh,
some years
great.
ago, and it really was excellent. And
Oh.
the others, he tried to kind of go back to this 17th century
Mm,
playwriting style in
mm,
France, uh, and I don't think it worked as well. And where
mm.
you, although I don't know, I mean, The Misunderstanding is probably works okay on stage, but I just don't think generally that his plays are as strong as his novels and stories and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I agree. Caligula's interesting, historically rooted, pushing everything to logical limits. The Image of the Moon is fantastic in
Yeah, yeah.
Caligula. I have a real soft spot for The Misunderstanding. I just love that play.
Actually, that I would call that one number two.
Yeah, yeah. It's
I think it's the later plays like State of Siege and
yeah,
The Just Assassins
just
that get a bit overworked.
yep,
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're right.
Mhm. Yeah, good. Yeah, interesting. If a biographical movie of Camus were to be made, who plays him in the movie, dead or alive?
I really racked my brain about that one. I mean, one could spontaneously say, "Oh, Humphrey Bogart." No,
Yep.
but actually, I think that would be a real mistake. I
Okay.
mean,
Hmm.
Bogart could never have talked like
Yeah.
like Camus. No, I finally decided that it should be Marcello Mastroianni.
Okay.
Yeah,
Give us the
he
little
had
bit background on him.
he had the look. Well, of course, he was such a great Italian
Okay.
actor,
Yep. Great.
and he did play Meursault in the film version of The Stranger.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
he was handsome,
Hmm.
and he was capable of of the kind of seriousness that in roles that he played that I
Hmm.
think Camus exhibited. So my choice would be Mastroianni.
Good. Yeah. Good choice. Um, I could see that developing someday. He still has such wide popular culture appeal. Um,
Yes, he does.
he just I keep a list in a kind of journal I have here on my desk when I see Camus references pop up in
Hmm.
pop culture and sources like that, and it's still very much referenced that way. So again, when we were talking earlier about Sartre and Camus' longevity, you see Camus rising in a
Yeah,
less, I think, professional area of pop culture, but it's still there, in
yeah,
a very strong
I
way.
think you're
So,
right. Well, isn't Camus still Gallimard's best-selling author?
yes,
I
yeah,
think he
yep,
is.
yeah, still the big horse in the stable there for Gallimard. And
Right. Yeah.
did you watch the FX television series labeled Fargo?
Oh yes, yes.
Yes,
Gosh, that's
season
great.
2 is just littered with Camus. I think it's season 2. It's the young woman in the butcher shop is always reading Camus. And the stamp that the brothers are after is Sisyphus rolling the rock up. It's
Oh,
just,
right,
and I've
right.
never really been able to
I,
locate who put that all in there. I've done some
yeah,
looking. Um,
completely forgotten about all that.
yeah, yep,
I should
yeah,
go back and take a look at.
yeah. The woman in the butcher shop has always got a trade paperback copy of Camus she's reading, and
Actually, I think there was also an episode of The Sopranos
oh yeah,
where Camus there's a reference. Somebody's reading Camus
yeah.
or something like that.
I
Yeah.
think you're right. Yep, I think I made a note of that at one time and never really went back and looked at the episode. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's something to that. I don't think you could get too academic with it, but there's maybe people that trade in that sort of notion of cultural studies could,
Yeah.
make something of that. But yeah, there's something to that.
Yeah.
In 1959, Camus said he was working on another novel that was not connected to The First Man, but it was going to be another original work. What do you think or hope that text was to be about?
You know, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I really, I mean, since The First Man is autobiography,
Hmm.
really,
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, I I was wondering if maybe he would have written more, kind of continuing the story,
Yeah.
but I just don't know. Um,
Yeah.
and he, yeah, I mean, I suppose he might have done something more with the religious
Maybe.
theme.
Yeah.
He was very taken with Simone Weil, and as he had been of Pascal as
Yes.
well. I mean,
Yeah.
I think she and Pascal are both sort of similar sort of thinkers.
Yeah.
But gosh, I really don't know. There was a book on Camus by Connor Cruz O'Brien,
Yep.
Albert Camus of Africa and Europe, in which he said that as of the Fall, the last novel, well, before First Man, that he believed Camus had been converted.
Yes.
Religious.
Yeah.
I was always skeptical about that.
Yeah.
I always argued that he was really an agnostic and not an atheist.
Yep.
I really did, and I think there's plenty of textual support for that. But gee, I don't know, because I think The First Man is such a wonderful narrative that I just wonder if he would have just kept on going, but I don't know.
Yeah, maybe a 3-part there. There's some notes that it was a trilogy, possibly this piece. And it's hard with Camus because a lot of these novel projects only took 2 years for him to write, research, write, edit, done. So you don't get a long extension. There's lots of hints in the journals about, oh, I should write about this or I should write about that. Sometimes they converge and become one piece. One of my favorite assignments I've given students in the past is I've pulled out a bunch of those starters he had in the journals and had them finish it in like a 750-word short story. You know, Camus would say, I should write about this, and then each one gets a different one, and away they go with projection on that. So yeah, it's hard, really hard to know where he would go. And then there's that terrible book. Is it what's the last person's name? Is it Mama? It's the pastor in Camus that came out with the where there's no evidence for any of the claims that Camus was privately meeting with this Methodist pastor, I think, and was wanting to become Christian, and there's no evidence for it at all.
And that's the book in which the pastor thinks that Camus' death was a suicide.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was it was because of his idea of the absurd. You know, it was too absurd, so he committed. And I thought, when I read that, I thought, whoa.
Yeah.
That is really completely unfactual.
It is absolutely. It remains on my bookshelf just because it's a Camus book, but it is one that's rough.
Right.
Rough to read. Have you heard the other one about Camus was killed by the Soviets?
No.
There's an article somewhere. I'll try to track it down and send it to you. There's an article written somewhere that the Soviets, it was one of the ways that they were eliminating people that they didn't like was actually these devices that would drive a blade into a car tire, and it was triggered when the car got up to a certain speed. And because that was a tool that the KGB was using during the time, somebody put the connection together that they wanted to eliminate Camus because he was, not in favor of that style of communism. So that's a weird one too out there.
That is a weird one.
Have you ever gone to the death site or the grave or anything?
No, I haven't. I never got there. No.
Yeah. It seems like a big journey to leave Paris and go that far away to see the grave, but I'd like to someday, certainly too.
Yeah. I'm mostly through reading a biography of Virginia Hall, who was an American who was one of the supreme spy masters in World War II.
Oh,
I mean,
cool.
I mean, it reads like a spy thriller, but it's all true, you know.
Mhm.
And she talks about staying in the same boarding house that Camus stayed in this was in Le Chambon-sur-Lignon,
Mhm.
when he was there in the earlier part of the war
Okay.
for because of his tuberculosis, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting. Yeah.
but she mentions being in the area where he had been.
We're in the same area. Hmm.
Yeah, same
Neat.
area. Yeah.
This is the final question then, Rod. Who would you like to see Camus debate, living or dead, and what topic would you want them to debate?
Oh gosh. And I think I can't say Sartre. Uh,
Yes.
that's really a hard one, and that's the one I just um, hit a brick wall trying to think about. Um, Gee, yeah, I don't want to just sit here and oh and ah, but it's I can imagine him debating somebody about his literary work.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
also imagine him debating somebody about his philosophical reflections.
Hmm.
Um, but wow, maybe it would be an interesting debate with his fellow French Algerian
Oh,
Derrida.
yeah. Wouldn't that be something? There you go. That's a good one. That is a very, very good one because there'd be so much common ground that they would have. The Venn diagram would sort of overlap a lot between those two. So it'd be really interesting to see where that would go. Yeah,
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 yeah.
that's a great.
Uh, and also, of course, Derrida got into uh, issues of religion and uh, so that yeah, and I heard Derrida. It was a whole conference really devoted to him and his work, and he was there. This was in
Oh,
2001,
neat.
and and what I discovered was that he was much clearer in person
Isn't that
than he
funny?
was in his books.
Wow.
So maybe if he were on the debate stage with Camus,
Yeah,
he'd be clear.
yeah, that would, yeah. Because you said he was better live than he was in writing, then yeah,
He's a
I
very
think that would
engaging
be
person.
a fascinating debate. Well, the last piece I want to pull up is one I warned you about. I did um, take my cut my teeth on Camus underneath you, and I am forever in debt to that because it has been a wonderful career choice to specialize in Camus. And one of the highest compliments I was ever paid was by a colleague of mine I graduated with at KU that said that Eric has managed to carve out a full-time professorship working in continental philosophy, which is not easy in the United States.
That's true.
So
That's true.
there's very
Yeah.
few of us
Yeah.
that have managed to do that. I've had to develop a skill to teach ethics to keep a paycheck coming in, but
Mhm,
yeah,
mhm.
it's not an easy thing
That's
to do.
no, that's a privilege.
It is. Oh, it is such a privilege. Yeah, and I have all the notes that I took uh, in your course, and a couple of my editions of Camus in the English are littered with notes too that I took when you taught that class. But it's this particular handout, or to reference one of our loved friends that's passed on, a pass out. Tony Genova always called him a pass
Oh
out.
yes, a pass
Is
out.
this
Yeah.
comparison
Oh
chart
yes,
that yeah,
yes. That was my chart, my
yeah,
Camus.
that you did on the aspects of Camus' thought, with Christianity and Camus on the other side, and
Hmm.
absurdity, faith, revolt, etc. in there. So I wanted to express to you my deep It's always Dr. Woelfel in my head still. My deep thanks, Dr. Woelfel, for the time that we've been able to spend together since 1999. It's been fantastic. So I do owe you a great deal of thanks for launching me, showing confidence in me, and launching me on a very satisfying life. So professionally.
Well, thank you very much. And I must say, I am deeply grateful for our friendship, which has lasted well beyond graduate school.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been a real gift to me.
Yeah, it has been
Yeah.
great. Well, I'm going to stop the recording now and thank you.
Okay.
And thank you for your time, Dr. Woelfel.
You bet. Great to talk to you. Best of luck.
Thank you.